There's a problem in your workplace. You might not know it. You probably do know it, but you have a problem in your workplace. And it doesn't matter what size of company you work for, a small company, a large company, or if you're a solo entrepreneur, you still work with people. And that problem, that's not the problem. That was my title slide. That problem is this. When was the assignment due? Oh, yesterday. So some people with ADHD, maybe 5 to 10% of the adult population, miss deadlines, they don't return phone calls, they miss meetings, they're not organized, they don't track their tasks. And how do I know this? Because I've been that problem employee and the frustrating coworker because I have ADHD. What is ADHD like? Let me give you an analogy, what it's like to have ADHD. Imagine a Formula One race car, really high performance car, has a lot of potential, a lot of power, a lot of capabilities. But imagine your Formula One race car doesn't have a very good steering wheel. Steering is difficult and the brakes are unreliable and the ignition doesn't work. So some days the car doesn't want to start, and if it does start, it doesn't stay running. So that's kind of like what it's like having ADHD. You can be really high performance in some conditions, and some days the car just won't start. Another way to consider, or another analogy to envision ADHD is in a model of a hunter and a farmer. A hunter gets up in the morning and they're motivated to feed their family. They're going to go out and they're going to find food because they're hungry, their family's hungry, so they're really motivated to go out and do something that they need to have done right now. They're very interested in an outcome. A farmer gets up, he thinks about how he's going to feed his family in 10 months. He's going to plant a crop, he's going to prepare his fields, he's going to tend his crop all this time. We live in a world of farmers and project managers and spreadsheets, and those of us with ADHD, we have a hunter's brain. We get up and say, what's interesting today? We don't get up and say, what's the deadline today? Well, what's interesting today? My story is that I'm a botanist. I went to school because I was so curious about science. I love plants, and I had a trip through botany and evolutionary biology and genetics and plant ecology. And I went to the University of Michigan and I did a PhD in plant ecology. So for 5 years, this was my workplace in the summer. Spent every day out in the woods. It just filled my insatiable need to be curious, to see things, to discover things. But then I go back to school and I had to write a dissertation about it. That was not fun. And it not only was it not fun, it turned out to be much harder than I expected because I did not know at the time that I had ADHD. I spiraled into a downward spiral that's pretty common among people with ADHD, of anxiety and depression and not knowing what the heck is going on because I loved what I was doing, but it was so hard at the same time. Sometime later, I went to see a therapist for help with anxiety and depression. She diagnosed me with ADHD. I'm like, oh, well, that makes a lot of things make more sense in retrospect. And since then, I've been on an upward spiral, trying to undo that or redo that, reinvent my life of learning how to deal with ADHD, learning about ADHD, and learning how to deal with ADHD so in a way that works with my hunter's brain in the world of farmers. ADHD has its funny moments, like this person. I hate when I'm cleaning my house and I accidentally watch 3 seasons of a TV show. In my house, we have funny things like who put the plastic bag of dishwasher pods in the freezer? And a couple days later, like who put the frozen shrimp under the sink? This actually happened. So they're funny things. And I found that a lot of people with ADHD have a good sense of humor, and there's some really good ADHD memes and commentary on social media out there, and so I've got a few of them to share with you. But ADHD isn't all funny. There's a lot of downside to it. For an individual, there's a lot of struggle. As I mentioned, a lot of people with ADHD go through an experience of depression and anxiety, not knowing what's going on, why they're experiencing this. There's a concept that's described as ADHD tax, that this is a tax that people with ADHD pay inadvertently because of things that go wrong or lost opportunities like lost jobs, or missed opportunities in their careers, or smaller things like excessive late payments because you forgot to pay a bill. And all those things are part of the ADHD tax. And something I just learned this week is that people with ADHD are 5 times more likely than the general population to commit suicide. So almost everybody I meet with ADHD talks about this struggle with anxiety and sometimes depression and what a relief it can be to get a diagnosis. And I mentioned 5 to 10% of the population. Traditionally, people think of ADHD as something that affects middle school boys. That's probably where it's first diagnosed or first recognized, partly because the hyperactivity of middle school boys makes it unavoidable that you can't miss it. ADHD affects girls, middle school girls too. It affects men and women, adult men and women. I meet a lot of adults, both men and women, that are diagnosed as adults. And the ADHD presents differently in adults and maybe in boys and girls. So there's a lot of ways it presents, but when you look at the characteristics of ADHD, they're all present in some way or another. Another way that ADHD has a negative outcome, negative effect, is on a larger society level. I found a study that suggests that nationwide there's maybe $140 billion of cost of ADHD through job turnover, employee turnover, job loss, mental health costs, lost productivity. So there's a lot of downside to ADHD, despite the humor we can sometimes find. I'd like to ask you, what are some of the attributes of ADHD that you think of? Yeah. Procrastination. Yeah, very good. Yeah.
You start a task and then don't finish it because you start on another task.
Yeah, exactly. Jumping from one task to another, not.
Glorified multitasking.
Yeah, glorified multitasking.
I focus on too many things at once and I spread myself thin.
Right, okay, spread yourself thin, focus on too many things. All really good answers. I'm going to share with you some attributes of ADHD today that are commonly recognized. I'm going to also share some attributes that aren't as well recognized, and then I'm going to ask you to reimagine those attributes. Then we're going to talk about my system of how to manage ADHD individually, and then some principles that I think are important to know in a workplace for how you can manage ADHD in a workplace, or if you work with people with ADHD, good things to know to better understand their perspective. Oh, I hit the wrong button, it went the wrong way. Okay, so some of the common attributes, and I'm going to flip the coin in a minute, are things like inattention and hyperactivity and impulsiveness. So I think we probably everybody's heard those as ADHD attributes. Then there are things like emotional hyper experience of emotions and hyper focus, interest-based focus, and also rejection sensitivity dysphoria. And the more I learn about ADHD, the more I realize how much of ADHD has an emotional and psychological load, not just as an effect of ADHD, but also a cause as a part of having ADHD. So what I'm describing, these attributes they all sound negative, and it's kind of in the name, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, hyperactivity, deficit disorder. It all sounds pretty bad. But I would like to challenge you, invite you to reimagine ADHD. So these attributes that I've given you can be seen as a flip side. They have a flip side that's a positive attribute. So inattention, that's a sign of being very curious. So switching from task to task, it's a sign of being a very curious person. Hyperactivity, that's a sign of energy and enthusiasm. Impulse control, that's a sign of being risk taker, willing to explore new things, try new things. Interest-driven focus, that's hyper-focus. That's a large capacity for learning, for being creative. Emotional hyperarousal, that's a sign of being passionate about something. And rejection sensitivity, that's a sign of caring very deeply about what you're doing. So on one hand, all those attributes are things that might cause somebody to be labeled as lazy or stupid or whatever. Pick your negative adjective. But on the other hand, these are attributes of artists and innovators and creative people and entrepreneurs and thought leaders. So the challenge is, how do we balance those two? How do we take the good with the bad? How do we manage the difficulty of ADHD to bring out the positive attributes of someone with ADHD? Cat Girl Heart, she encapsulates the paradox and the challenge this way. My best feature is that I'm blindingly intelligent for about 30 seconds each day. I don't get to choose which seconds, and they're not consecutive. So this is a paradox. This is a challenge with ADHD, that people with ADHD have so much talent and capability, but it's not available on demand without a lot of management. So I've had various performance reviews and feedback at work with people that are well-meaning to try to help me. They say things like, well, why don't you just use Post-it notes to remind you of your priorities? Okay, I admit the picture on the left, I just found that online to be funny. The picture on the right, that's actually a picture of my desk. That's my organization system with Post-it notes. So not very good task management. So Amelia, I need some organizational help. But telling somebody with ADHD, just organize yourself, just manage your tasks. That's kind of like the Nike platitude, just do it. That's a great platitude, that's a great saying in some ways. Doesn't really work with somebody with ADHD. It's like telling somebody that plays basketball, they're not able to dunk, and say, well, have you thought about being taller? No. You've got to take a different approach if you're going to dunk. So I came up with an acronym for managing ADHD, and this is what I advocate for individuals to keep in mind. And also, if you work with somebody with ADHD, if you have a child with ADHD, I think this is a good acronym. This kind of encompasses a lot of my principles that I've learned about ADHD. So the acronym is AWARE. So the A stands for awareness, and I can't emphasize this enough. The awareness helps a lot. To realize, to have a diagnosis of ADHD and to understand what's going on just reflects, this is the way your brain works. You have the hunter's brain in a farmer's world. This is a condition that's genetic. It's about as heritable as height. So there's a lot of genes. As many human behaviors, it's a complex trait. There's a very large genetic component. There's also an environmental component. So it's a very complex trait. So if you have a diagnosis, or somebody you know has a diagnosis of ADHD, realize this is not their fault. It's not a character defect. It just is what it is. But the awareness can help destigmatize it and also help understand that you might need a little extra assistance managing in some way or another. The second thing is wellness. So the W in AWARE is wellness. Wellness, physical health, mental health, diet, nutrition, exercise, sleep hygiene. So all those things that everybody tells you need to have a healthy, good life are important for ADHD. If you have ADHD and some of those things are out of balance, you're going to have a much harder time managing ADHD. If you don't have ADHD and you have those things are your life's out of balance in these areas, then that's going to also give you ADHD-like symptoms. Assistance, coaching, therapy, reaching out to professional help in whatever way you need for assistance to manage. So this is part of my logo, my brand that I've came up with is Don't ADHD Alone. So where you struggle, look at a way to outsource that and find help. And then resources. There's a lot of resources, more resources coming available all the time, apps, time management, timers, things like that are available. And then engagement, using groups, using other people, co-working, working with people. I discovered that I love to show up at work at 8 a.m. for a Monday morning meeting because that gets me engaged. It gets me there and motivated and engaged. Some people hate them. I love it because it gets me engaged. So my engagement is using other people, groups, and I subscribe to an online service for a planning meeting every morning. So I log on to a planning meeting and go through a planning process. I could do that on my own. I don't. But when I have a meeting on my calendar, I show up for it. And then understanding ADHD in the workplace, a few principles that I'm going to go through in just the last couple minutes we have. Everyone in every situation is unique. So everybody with ADHD presents in different ways. So just appreciate their differences, and one size does not fit all. People with ADHD are trying, they want to contribute. They're like the duck on the on the pond. The duck is just peacefully moving across the water, looks very peaceful, looks like they got it under control. Underneath the water, their feet are going 100 miles an hour. That's how they move. So somebody with ADHD might not show that they're struggling with something, but their brain is hyperactive and dealing with something. Shame, guilt, executive function anxiety, those are part of ADHD. So somebody with ADHD may be carrying a pretty significant emotional load that you might not realize. They're motivated by interest, not deadlines that I mentioned. So I try to gamify things. So if I have a project that a deadline I'm working on, I try to give myself a reward along the way and a reward at the end, because that helps make it a game that makes it more interesting to me. And there's a need to externalize some functions, as I mentioned. So that doesn't mean give up, don't do things, but like this guy in the canoe, he needs an outrigger for a little more balance. So it doesn't mean he's not going to try to paddle his canoe. He's not going to go out on the ocean. He's going to use an outrigger to externalize some of his functions. So I promised you earlier this title, Moving from Procrastination to Productivity. So hope I've shared with you, help you appreciate the potential people have with ADHD, and my acronym AWARE for different principles for managing ADHD, and then shared some things about understanding ADHD in the workplace. And this is probably my favorite ADHD meme I've ever found. And I'd love to connect with you. I've talked with some of you already, and I'd love to talk to you more. Connect with me on LinkedIn, and I have a website to support my speaking on ADHD, don'tadhdalone.net. So thank you very much.